Hello there. Welcome to my podcast. My name is Brett Levens. This episode brings you my first sponsor, Todd Edwards, again. This is the second episode with Todd. You can go back and listen to the first episode where we talk about the steps and some other topics as well. I wanted to talk about connection and this concept of the fellowship, and how crucial I believe it is for recovery. Todd's a, great person to yak with about it, and he's had some things happen in his life recently that really illustrates it. So I asked him if he'd be willing to come on the podcast again. He said, yep. And so I bring you a conversation about connection in recovery. So welcome, everybody, to the latest podcast. I'm here with Todd Edwards. Todd is my first sponsor from back in 2013 when I got sober in Fort Collins, Colorado. We've stayed in touch, so I've known him since month one of my sobriety. We stay in touch. And we just hit the record button, and I just hit the record button a moment ago. We started talking, and as it always happens it seems to me that people in recovery tend to get to good stuff right away. And I mean, human stuff. We did. So I said, Todd, stop. So I said, let me get the recording going. So that's just a little look behind the scenes. So he and I were texting together. The general premise of the chat that we sort of talked about is this idea about connection, finding people. And Todd, if you would be up for it, man, will you rewind that little bit of that story you were just telling to kick this off?
Sure. I think basically what we were talking about is that yesterday I went to what is basically my home group meeting in Fort Collins, Colorado, and raised my hand for what we call our birthdays, which is to celebrate the years of sobriety. And for me, it was 17 years. But it wasn't 17 years yesterday. It was back at the end of May 26th is my birthday. And that's, if I remember correctly, that's 2 days before yours.
Yes.
So we kind of have that connection, a few years, in 2 days. And, but anyway, so I've had some pretty rough things going on in my life, and some serious loss and grief. And my father and my brother both passed away in June, and 8 days apart. So my father died on the 10th of June. My wife and I thankfully made it to Kansas City 3 or 4 days later, and were able to spend a day with my brother. And then he died the very next morning. And both my father and my brother had been sick. My dad had Parkinson's disease and was 20 days shy of being 88 years old. And in many ways, the passing was kind of merciful, because he was in more and more discomfort. My brother was diagnosed with a brain tumor 18 months ago. So he beat the odds, which said 3 or 4 months of life, and he lived 18 months after the diagnosis. So anyway, so I've spent a lot of time in kind of chemo wards and hospitals, and in a memory unit for my father, where, most of the time it was full masking and, and sort of, so I wasn't able to go all the time to my regular meeting, which has 100 people in it sometimes. And so, we've been back for a couple of months, and I've been sort of hesitant to talk in a big group about this, partly worried about, kind of my emotions. And so I spoke yesterday about having 17 years, and and as we mentioned before we started recording, there was definitely some strong emotions that came out. And I think the the point I was trying to make is, after the meeting, I probably had 15 people come up to me, some at the same time, some waiting for a chance. And I was there for, half hour to 45 minutes after the meeting. And it turns out, like you said, this is human stuff, right? And so unfortunately we all deal with loss, um, and death, and this thing about the fellowship is that, not only do we share the disease and the recovery, but we also share the details of life. And so it was an amazing experience to be able to talk about it, and to some extent I couldn't fully talk about it because I got emotional. We can get into kind of what I think were interesting themes about it, but exploring the topic of grief, one of the things that has been surprising is fear. And fear is one of these things, these basic human emotions that we all share, whether we're alcoholic or not. And but I guess to end that comment, the power of the fellowship and being in recovery with a group of people, and this group includes people that were there on the first day that I walked into the program. One of our mutual friends, Lance, got 23 years yesterday, and so he spoke first. And he was one of the guys that was literally in the room when I walked in on day one. And so, there's all those powerful connections inside of recovery that allow you to get through this stuff. One final point, one surprising thing is, as we were driving home from the joint funeral for my father and my brother, and having gone through this very emotional and sort of shocking event, it occurred to me that never once had I thought about drinking. Like there was absolutely no sense in which drinking or using would have improved things. And that was kind of surprising because I didn't, oftentimes I'll at least wonder whether, gosh, what would I have done in the old days, and it just didn't come up. So those are a lot of topics, and I'm certainly happy to go wherever you want to go.
Yeah. Well, I've already said, I'll just say this on this podcast because, sorry about all that, Todd. This is, I'll pick this, I'll run with this theme. So as I'm really interested in patterns. I'm interested in seeing patterns in human behavior in the rooms of recovery. And one of the things I hear on the regular is, yeah, but what if when something horrible happens, right? That I've heard so many times. Yeah, but I'm good now, but what if X, Y, or Z happens? Or the person who says, kind of like you right now, X, Y, or Z happened and I was able to stay sober. And I've heard X, Y, or Z has happened, and that was, I couldn't take it, and I had to start drinking again. So you can't know, right? There, I don't have this in my story yet, Todd. I haven't lost, a parent yet, but it's something that I think about, right? Like how am I going to deal with that? So if you're up for it, why don't we meet? You're 17 years sober. You've got some reps, right? You may have thought about this in advance about, your recovery and what you're going to do, but was there anything action oriented that you were doing to prevent it, or was it as natural as the rain falls from the sky? What would you say there?
It's a great question. And I think as a background, like you, I'm always looking for kind of patterns, and I think when I sit in meetings and I listen to people speak, I think the first thing that always makes me kind of, sort of listen more closely is when people talk about going back out of, stopping their sobriety, and I want to know, how did that happen? But I also always listen to people when bad stuff happens in their life, and kind of how are they dealing with this. And so 17 years means I've heard a lot of people with a lot of tough things that have happened. Um, the honest truth is, I don't think there's any strong correlation between bad stuff and drinking. Again, the bigger pattern that I see is people um, stepping back from connection and fellowship and spiritual progress, and that distance allows something to happen mysterious as it is. It would appear to be a sort of, coup d'etat of the ego that says, I've got this. And then whether good stuff happens or bad stuff happens, you're more susceptible to going back out. So with me specifically, I didn't do anything differently than I've always done. I mean, I think I did more of it. And I think the program, the thing in recovery in general, the thing that is so significant is sort of the concept of paying attention to what's going on in your mind and in your emotions, and not judging what it is, maybe labeling it, and knowing that it changes, that it has a lot of unusual contours. um, and if anything, it's just a period of magnified human emotions, right? And but one of the things that we always talk about, like it almost becomes a cliche in meeting rooms, is that your thoughts and your emotions are kind of like trains at Grand Central Station. Like, they're coming and they're going all the time, and you don't have to get on one if you don't want to. And so, I definitely texted and spoke on the phone I wouldn't say lots of people, like you and I texted, periodically. And I certainly texted some of my closer AA friends and contacts. Um, I have one person that I'm working with pretty closely, and we talked on the phone quite a bit. But I also connected with non-recovery friends from my life. Um, and I probably did a little bit more reading, um, sort of spiritually oriented reading than normal, to kind of help get through it. But if anything, all that means is that I was doing a little bit more of the same rather than something different. And so I would conclude this comment also by saying I am a gigantic, like, the word fellowship sometimes sounds, whatever. It's like the Lord of the Rings sounding, or, something like that. Um, but really it means human connection, like creating them, and then nurturing them and maintaining them, and then using them when bad stuff happens. So I was overwhelmed yesterday when I talked about my situation, and why I had not been able to talk about um, my sobriety birthday back at the end of May. And but telling my story, yesterday, like, I was overwhelmed by kind of the number of people that were reaching out, that it's like, wow, there's 50 people that I know on a first name basis, and half of them are coming up to, give me a hug, or shake my hand, or just, somebody gave me a title. They had written a title of a book down on a piece of paper. Another woman literally gave me a rock that was painted like a ladybug. And I guess there's some group of people that, when somebody experiences severe loss in their life, that you kind of hand the ladybug to them. So I got it yesterday, and my only responsibility is, when I see somebody in pain, from death in the family to go and talk to them and give it to them. And what she said was amazing. She said, you don't have to do this alone. There's a lot of us here to do it with you. That these things pass. Again, what we just talked about, that it takes time and you have to feel it to heal, and then to pass it on, and that's the essence of AA. So this is so it's a cool rock, but really it's about fellowship and connection, and all of us supporting one another. One final comment. Somebody said in the meeting, there's a guy that I'm kind of into reading called Ram Dass, who's, contrary to the sound of the name, he's an American guy. And he said something to the effect that really what we're all trying to do is just walk one another home. And that's the spirit of this thing. And I'm so grateful to be part of that while I go through this event in my life.
Yeah, that's lovely. I have to tell a short story about Lance and the feel thing you just said. So when I was in Fort Collins, right, and I'm very early in sobriety, I guess about 2 months now that you've tagged the time. Lance was one of these people that I reached out to. So here's the thing, folks. If you're listening and you're considering going into the rooms of AA and it's a terrifying thought to you, et cetera, I get it. I've been there. And I've got lots of stories to share on that. And I'm going to share one now, right? I'm the guy who sat in the back. I'm the guy who gets out of there fast. And that's what I need to do for a while. And so there's room for that, right? So, but over time, the picture that Todd is painting, which I concur with as one of the pillars of my belief system when it comes to recovering from drug and alcohol abuse, is two things. One, if you have this thing, call it alcoholism or whatever else, inability to moderate, you probably want to stop drinking as number one. And number two is you probably want to find some people. So I'm going to lead with that. And then I'm going to tell you this story, Todd. I think you'll enjoy. I've probably told you it before. But I'm about 2 months sober, and I got called on in a meeting or whatever. I was new to sharing. Sharing wasn't comfortable for me, and I cried right in front of a group of people. And I was horrified, fucking horrified that I had done that. And I left there and I went home and I, just wound up like a spinning top, just wound up. And Lance was somebody who I felt like Lance is in Fort Collins. He's a established guy, wonderful human being. And I called him. I picked up, as they say, the 10,000 pound phone, and I called Lance. And I don't remember what I said, Ty. I'm sure it was just like, I cried and I don't know. And he's like, whatever, it's okay. People do that, blah, blah, blah. He talked me down. I don't remember exactly. But the next morning was at the Bill and Bob's meeting, which was where I went every morning. And he got his 13-year coin that morning. And that meeting, they passed the coin around, right? And then it goes back to goes around the horn and people say something nice about the person getting the coin. Well, Lance is an established person, 13. So he's sitting up in front. And I didn't talk, but it got back to him, probably 50 people in the room. And he starts crying. Now, here's a guy that looks like he's fresh off of, the motorcycle gang. I mean, he's a rough and tumble guy, and he'll tell you stories that sort of illustrate that from his story. And time stood still for a moment for me, Todd, because he was starting to talk about his gratitude, and he stopped and he looked right at me, and tears are coming down his face. He's 13 years sober. And he looked right at me. He says, "You see, Brett, you got to feel to heal." And in that moment, I'm getting all misty right now just thinking about it. Like, that was a moment where I realized, wow, this is the process of becoming human again. Well, I didn't think of that then. I just, but I really do believe that this is a pattern too for most of us, is especially early, but later too. It's like emotions are back online. Like, yeah. For a lot of us, we've stunted all that because we've we're drunker than hell most of the time. We're not in touch with this human stuff. We're blotting it out, whatever, numbing, running from whatever. So all these emotions come back online. And then these moments happen where waterworks happen. You don't expect it. In fact, you'd rather it didn't happen, but you can't help it, right? And in those moments when you observe it, like the people who stood there and shook your hand, there's that connection, right? And of the 25 people that shook your hand, I guarantee you there were 25 more that were feeling something. And in those moments, we realize that we're part of something greater than ourselves. At least that's the way I say it. People listening can call BS on that. That's the way I look at it. And those moments are gold to me. Listening to that, watching that, and then when it happens for me, less comfortable very often. But I've gotten more used to it. Like in the early days, it would really bother me. It bothers me less because I realize that these are those moments that being really in touch with being a human are so special. And so anyway, I'll never forget that. Hey, Brett, you see, my man, you got to feel to heal. And you just said that, and it reminded me of Lance. So I'll pause there.
Yeah, it's amazing, and a number of the people that came up kind of made your same point, which was, first of all, to thank me for being willing to do that, and that it touches 100 people to be able to let those human emotions happen and share them with a group of people that not only has helped, save my life, but is also struggling with the same issues. So a couple of people said, like, you specifically help us by your willingness to be honest, even when honesty kind of sucks, right? Like no 59-year-old man who wants to sit in a room of 100 people and cry. Right? Like it's just, it's not part of our DNA, and yet that is part of the DNA of recovery, right? And what that ultimately gets to is this. I You and I have talked about this a lot, that denial is tricky and it's complex, and all of us suffer from denial. And simple denial can just be, no, I didn't have 12 beers, I only had 3, right? But you can get pretty complex in your denial, like saying, if I have 12 beers but I can run 8 miles, then I'm fine, right? And or you can create all kinds of basically little lies that you tell yourself, and often you believe them, right? That's why it's so complicated. Um and I get down to the basic concept that denial and lying is sickness, and rigorous honesty and openness is recovery, or it's the beginning of recovery. And so if we're trying to hide to people that we're not in pain, then we're not telling the truth. And so if you can tell the truth to a room of 100 people in a way that is painful and real, then you're actually participating in recovery in a group setting. Um, One more comment, which was, yesterday's one of the topics yesterday in the discussion was humility, and how critical humility is to all of our recovery. It's a part of honesty, right? To have humility, to be humble. But somebody said something that really struck me, which was, coming to meetings and being there and showing up and being authentic is a form of humility, and being willing to connect with other people and to create fellowship from scratch. um, that's humility. And I was kind of thinking about the opposite, that and I certainly experienced what you did, sitting in the back and zipping out of the meeting as soon as I could, one of the things I hated was coming early to meetings early on because everybody was having such a great time. And the first meeting that I used to go to was in this church, and I would just walk right through the meeting room where everyone was laughing and drinking coffee and, having a great old time. And I would go straight back to the chapel and just sort of say, oh my God, God help me, how is this ever going to end? And it took a while to understand why everyone was laughing and smiling, and that they were helping each other and being honest and open. And so anyway, that struck me that that it's a form of honesty and humility to be able to be vulnerable in front of a group of people and not feel like you're a loser, and actually realize that you might actually be helping somebody. So it's interesting stuff.
Yeah, that tees up something perfect for me. So you may not remember this. You probably will, but Todd was so connection, right? So once again, I'm going to paint this picture. I'm scared to death these early meetings, right? I'm not interested really in quote unquote fellowship, which is a word on the long list of words that irritated me, right? So, but and if you want to go back, there's a podcast where I talk about meeting you, right? And then you became sort of the beginning of my fellowship, right? In a real way. Like I could talk to you. And that was like the beginnings of me feeling less different and more like I potentially belong, because I could bounce stuff off of you, right? And you were cool with it. And I remember two things, but I'm going to pick one. The one that I'm going to lean on here is I would tell you that, just how I would be honest. I was being vulnerable with you, dude. I don't want to stick around. I don't want to get there early. I don't want to meet people. Like I feel so out of place. And, rather than shame me or, all the things that you're afraid will happen, you didn't do that. But the one challenge you gave me, and I don't know if you remember this, was why don't you give yourself a challenge to shake one hand before you leave the meeting? Do you remember that?
I do. Yeah. Partly because it's a line that I have used periodically. Like it's not, I'm glad I used it, but yeah.
So this is after some of the other tough stuff that about with me trying to make connections in meetings that didn't go well, right? And so I started doing that, right? And I'm a pretty sociable person, as it turns out. It's just whatever. But I started shaking one hand per meeting, and that was all I did. It was as simple as, sometimes it would be as simple as, hey, I enjoyed your share. Or, that's an easy one, right? That's makes sense. Or, I don't remember like going up to the head of the meeting, which was kind of scary because they seemed like they were the grand poobah, right? But they really were. They're just another person, right? And say thank you for chairing the meeting. And I had these little tricks, and I kept doing that, and that was helpful to me to begin to understand that I was a part of something greater than myself in those rooms, and the fellowship, connection, whatever words you want to use. It turns out, humility, everybody's in there. Like I sometimes thought, this is kind of my more kind of morbid humor streak. I think about all these people. Let's just say it's 60 people. Imagine all of us, snap your finger, are back deeply into our disease in a moment's notice, right? 60 people just absolutely ripped, because we all in there were capable of massive being ripped.
Yep.
And so in that moment, you can kind of just imagine all the craziness that's happening. But instead, that's not what's happening. As a matter of fact, we're all there sober, or most of us, right? There might be some people that are still finding their way. But man, is that a powerful thing to consider. And then all of a sudden, over time, I got to where I realized I'm not unique, man. I'm garden variety. I'm just like everybody else here. And now all of a sudden we can have these kinds of deep conversations that you and I get to, like, turn the key and we're into some rich stuff. As it turns out, I've got all kinds of people like that in my world and at meetings and stuff. And all of a sudden this getting tapped into community connection on my terms for the most part, right? Nobody's forcing me to do anything, but over time, this natural phenomenon occurs where I want connection. And then lo and behold, I want to help the guy or gal that's coming in who's as scared as all get out as I was. So, yeah, shaking those hands in those early days, Todd, that was a good challenge. Just the right amount, you know?
Yeah. 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 I mean, everyone struggles. Like you said, the 500-pound phone also, right? Like, because we all struggle in the meetings, especially early on to make connections. But then, we all go through the same process where we're like, that guy doesn't want me to call him. Like, why would I call him? And, and then they'll say stuff in the meetings like that'll make somebody's day. And you're like, yeah, right. Like, I'm going to call the guy and make his day. And then you do it and you have like a little conversation like we have,
Yeah.
and like you said, it's a process of discovery where you're like, wow, this is actually pretty awesome, and I'm not different, and these guys are just like me, and part of our program is fellowship, and so part of fellowship is connecting, frequently with people like us. So it's like it's sort of like siphoning gas, right? Like the very beginning of it is pretty bad, and it's uncomfortable, and like there's some opportunity to make some mistakes, and then when it's going, it's like, all right, this is pretty cool. But and I would just say that it isn't, once you're in and doing it's easy forever, right?
Sure.
Like, there's also a natural ebb and flow in our own lives, and I will say that this period of time where my dad and my brother were both sick, it kind of happened during COVID. So my father was diagnosed in 2019, but he was still, darn healthy and totally mobile and totally with it. Um, and then COVID hit, but he took a major fall during COVID. So he's one of those people where spouses were not able to see each other in hospitals. They had to look through the window and talk on cell phones. And while he was in the hospital and then also rehabbing at the retirement community they live in, um, but we all had trouble maintaining connections during COVID, right? Like, we all went virtual meetings. I mean, I honestly didn't do a damn thing for like 3 months because I just thought it was going to be over or something. Like, and then it was like, oh, it's not going to be over. We got to find some digital help. But then as COVID was getting over, my family members were getting sicker, and it would have been irresponsible for me to go sit in a room of 100 people once. And so that group stopped the digital meetings at about the time that I couldn't go back to public meetings. So I scrambled for a lot of different kind of ways to maintain connection, and I did some men's group things. I did like a big book study group that was amazing. I you and I have had these periodic chats. I used to go during the height of COVID and meet my sponsee, and we'd go for walks and talk program but be outside even when it was like freezing cold. um, and then I got shy again, like, because I was away, and big stuff was happening in my life, and it became harder for a while, and so to connect, and so I've had to take my own advice and go and make myself stay after the meetings and go connect with people, and so that's also why yesterday was such a big deal, because I was able to finally get honest in the group and then be shown how deep these connections really are, and so it was amazing. Anyway, it's a long way of saying, like, we're all, to one degree or another, a little shy, and we don't want to be vulnerable. We don't always want to, make the effort. And so it's part of the magic of the program to just do it, right? And then it turns out it's the same as speaking in a large group of people, right? Like nobody really wants to speak in front of 100 people, and then you do it, and a lot of times it feels pretty good after you're done. And when you make that effort to connect with people, it ends up feeling pretty darn good, almost all the time.
So I'm going to speak to we're already speaking to this, but the person who's listening, if they've made it this far, they've gotten through enough kumbaya, right? That person, right, that says, yeah, I can do this alone. No thanks, right? Uh, they haven't bought into this idea that everything that we're saying is actually really positive, but instead it's just the opposite, right? Because I've been that person as well, right? I tried really hard to handle my alcoholism, and I'm using that word, so if that offended anybody, sorry. My moderation capacity had been clearly tried at great length all by myself, and it was a disaster every 24 hours. So for years, right? And so for me, this idea that people could help me was foreign and sort of, I'm going to use the word aberrant. It was not attractive. In AA, they say attraction, not promotion. It was not attractive, this idea that I would go in there and that I would potentially, and I'm going to use the word need people, right? That doesn't sound attractive to me. That sounds awful. And so, as you just said, Todd, early on in those meetings, what I would do if I got myself, once I started going is, very often I would be looking for the differences rather than the commonalities, right? And so, that was a process. Luckily, I had you in my corner to come out of the ring, sit in the corner with you, and tell you things, and you'd wipe my brow and send me back out there. But what I found over time is that you start to realize everybody feels those ways, right? And so you don't have to be perfect. It's not a performance. It's a long arc of again, I use these words, becoming human again. And it just so happens that these fellowships and these connections and stuff are a really good way to find, I'm using not you, for me to find my way back to a kind of humanity that alcohol and drugs stunted for so many years. So I say all that because, some people will find that, well, yeah, whatever, dude. And some people will be like, yeah, you're right on the money, man. I went to an AA meeting and everything you guys are saying scares me, right? I mean, my first meeting, we're holding hands at the end. Like that was like Martianville to me. And to this day, now I make jokes at every meeting, whether I'm at my home group or anywhere else, about hand holding. Like, and it lightens the mood because everybody like understands that can be kind of a weird thing. By the way, not all meetings handhold. In fact, many don't, but some do. So that's a thing that can happen at the end and surprise some people. So,
yeah.
But over time, it's actually kind of cool. So anyway, that's a lot.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Yeah.
Anything that's interesting to you?
Well, we have talked over the years multiple times about different paths to sobriety and different programs and whether they work or not. And I think both of us are pretty, let's just say, pretty open to like the idea that we don't have some kind of claim on the one way to sobriety. So there's obviously other paths to sobriety, but I would tend to say a couple of things from my experience. I've had friends and relatives, that have tried these various programs of moderated drinking. I don't think they work. And that sounds like I believe I've found the truth and that's the only truth, but I haven't seen a single moderated drinking program that works. And there's an old saying in AA that about whether kind of to, sort of quickly decide whether you're an alcoholic. And it's like, if you are in control, then you're not getting what you want, right? So it requires honesty about how much you would like. And so if you're in control, it means that you're controlling your drinking, and it means you're not getting what you want. So if you're in control, you're not getting what you want. And if you get what you want, you're not in control, right? And that's a pretty simple way to start, whether you're an alcoholic or not. So these kind of moderate drinking programs, I think, what you're talking about is a lifetime of white knuckling it, right? Of not getting what you want, but saying that's better than whatever program there is that is centered on abstinence. And so, like I said, I've tried controlled drinking enough to know that it required a Herculean effort every single day. I used to travel in Europe for business on these 2-week trips. And when the alcoholism was really starting to kick in, it was interfering with my ability. I had to give presentations like throughout the day. And so I came up with one of my many plans where I would moderate my drinking. And I gave myself 2 beers a day, right? So every day was like a decision about like when would it be best to have those 2 beers. Like you could have one at lunch and then one at dinner, but it would be better, it would feel better to have them both together to maximize the effect, right? And then it would be like, well, I'm flying home tomorrow, so today I don't need to do the two. And anyway, I've done a million of those controlled only on the weekends, right? So suddenly the weekend is no longer Saturday and Sunday. It's Thursday night through Monday night, right? Or anyway, it's if you are one of us and you want more than the human body can take, to stay normal, then moderated or controlled drinking for the rest of your life is like a prison sentence. So sorry to go that long on that. But the other thing is, doing it on your own is really dangerous. And the reason is what we were talking about with denial. What I've just gone through with you is my own denial, right? Like thinking I have a program that I can design and implement that will beat this disease, and I don't need a damn thing from anyone else, right? And the basic elements of my programs were always controlled drinking and more fitness, right? So if I got in super duper shape, maybe read a couple of books, and then had a program, only beer and wine, only on the weekends, only 2 beers while I'm in Europe, or whatever it is, it never worked. And the problem is when you're on your own, the risks of denial, which are the lies that we tell ourselves that we believe, the risk of believing your own BS is much higher. And so, you and I've been your sponsor. That I know what I'm talking about because I've done the same damn thing you were doing, and we're getting well together. And it doesn't have to be a specific name of a program, but it's probably got to include stopping what you're doing and getting close to some people that are going to tell the truth with you.
Yeah. That's what it boils, 10 years in, not that I have any PhD in this recovery business, but I've been watching and paying close attention to a lot of things in and outside. We say the rooms. What we mean by that is AA meetings inside the rooms. And that seems to be the two pillars, right? I don't know. I'm willing to have them adjust or whatever, but finding people, and if you have this thing, like if you can moderate a drinker, if you're somebody who can drink half a glass of wine, I'm not, that's awesome. Like we're talking about people like us. Everything Todd just described is me to a T, right? And we're laughing. But in the middle of it, it's not funny at all. It's tragic, it's painful, it's scary, it's frustrating. But now we laugh about it. And it's wonderful. We can laugh about, you use the word prison. Like, we're out of prison, man. There's a freedom that I can enjoy the world. I can go places without all that mental baggage about where the booze is going to be, how are we going to get home safely, and each one of those is negotiable depending on the situation I'm in, because number one priority is I got to get my buzz. And as you said a minute ago, I don't want to be in control. I want full boat. And for me, that ended in the last few years was just very sad solo drinking by myself, because that was the only place I could really pull all that off.
Right.
But yeah, we find out over time, people tell their stories. It's like, oh God, that's me too. Holy moly, that's me too. And suddenly this being in a group, whether it's an AA, whether it's, you name it, man. I've got one guy in my home group, Todd. He's never set foot into an AA meeting. He's into a bunch of other ones. He loves them. There's a podcast, if anybody's listening, go listen to Jim's story. Never been to an AA meeting. He's one of the most fun persons you ever been around. So it's possible, but I'm back to the pillar. I don't care. Again, I try not to give advice because I don't like getting advice particularly. And so I'm aware of that. But a pattern that I see is, it seems to me that finding people you can relate with and be, as you said, be honest with, maybe they're not even in recovery. I don't know, but that accountability, maybe it's family but something magical about when you talk to somebody that can tell a story like you just spun up there. And I'm like, oh, yep. All the different little scenarios and plans that just go through the ditch over and over and over again. Right. There's powerful about that. Fellowship, connection. There's a dude in fact, I was just thinking about this before we met. There's a TED Talk, this guy talks about the opposite of addiction is connection. Have you seen that one? Yeah, I'll put it in the show notes for folks. It's really quite powerful, and it basically talks about humans being wired for connection.
Interesting.
And so we're back to that, and here you and I are connecting. We talk every so often, and we're ready to dive in and be humans, and it's amazing, right? And I believe it helps me with my quote unquote recovery. So my program, if you don't like it, tough, and it's working for me, right? And so even though life isn't always easy, it seems to me to be a lot easier when I can stay in touch with other people in recovery. 10 years later, still true.
Hey, I was going to make one more comment about I agree with pretty much everything you just said. And that is like we've talked about, that's the connection. One of the things I like to point out to people is in this kind of concept that denial is very, very powerful and very, very complicated. I like to think of alcoholism as it's ultimately a disease, right? And you either have it or you don't. And so it is not a function of what you wish or what you want, right? And so the kind of common denominator of these silly little programs that we implemented on our own, right? That we designed, right? One of my famous ones was only drinking when we had company. And guess what? We started having a lot of company and great big dinners but one time I quit for a year. I was living in New Orleans and I didn't quite make it a year. I think I made it like 11 and a half months to my birthday. And boy, was that a big birthday. But the essence of the program of the controlled drinking is that you think that something that you're going to do is going to make it clear whether you're an alcoholic or not. And there's absolutely nothing that you can. So it's like diabetes, right? Like you can't try harder to not be a diabetic, and you can't run faster and drink 2 beers to make yourself not an alcoholic. Only an alcoholic designs these things. And so when you and I see people saying like, oh yeah, whatever, I'm only going to drink on Wednesdays or anything like that. The only person crazy enough to do that is one of us, right? Like, and it's sad. You don't want to say it in public, like, hey, good, keep trying, good for you. But like I said, you cannot try harder and make yourself not an alcoholic, right? So that's one of the things I said in the meeting yesterday. The hardest step for me was step one. I'm powerless over alcohol and my life has become unmanageable. I was fine with the powerless over alcohol because I had tried so many damn times with all these ridiculous programs to control it. It didn't work. But I wanted to be in charge. I wanted to say I was still controlling everything. And that's hard to let go of. And so that's one of the beautiful things about the fellowship is doing this with other people. Like, I had a sponsor, so I was ticked off because I started shaking, the last couple of years, my hands did. And so I had little kids, and the honest truth is tying my son's shoes was a little bit of a task. So sometimes I'd have a quick beer in the morning, and I was a little ticked off. All the other kids had Velcro shoes. Like, why did my kids still have shoestrings? Right? Like, as if that was a normal thought. Um, so, it takes it, number one, you are or you aren't. And number two, if you are, you need help. And that's where the humility comes in to ask for help. And slowly the help becomes fun. And then we're doing what you and I are doing.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh, I gotta share this one too. Yes, all of the above. So those that aren't steeped in AA stuff, Todd just rattled off the first step. There's 12 steps. 12 steps over, and this first step is we admitted we were powerless over alcohol and our lives had become unmanageable. And I can remember when Todd first laid that one on me, how irritated I was about most of it. So anyway, let's just set that aside. But then step two comes along. And look, I'm not advocating AA. So those of you that are starting to get uncomfortable because I'm advocating AA or starting to step thump, I'm not. In fact, go listen to our Todd and I's other conversation about the steps, the other podcast. I think you'll find it pretty welcoming. But step two, like my favor, step one and two, like they are the rocks. And step two says, came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. Well, here's the part of it that I didn't catch until about 5 months in, and it was Lane, your sponsor, who set me up on this one. We were sitting outside, and I'd gotten to know Lane a bit, and he says, Brett, notice it doesn't say we believe; it said we came to believe. So first off, insanity, like everything you just described, like who does that? Who drives into a beach town and starts looking at all the hours on all the mini marts in advance of going to the place where you're staying? Who, these actions that we did, let's just call them insane. Let's just call them insane for kicks. But this came to believe idea. Well, guess what? I'm coming to believe all kinds of things. And I'm coming to believe that a power greater than myself doesn't necessarily mean religion, but just to really tie in the whole connection thing. For me, connection is huge. Came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore sanity. Is it possible, Todd, that there's a power greater than ourselves, you and me talking right now, than each of us individual? Is it possible there's a power greater than ourselves with this being transmitted to a few ears that might find value in it? I submit that the answer is yes to both of those.
Yeah.
And so call me crazy, but I like this idea that it's not rigid, that I don't have to check boxes. I don't have to, I joke with a guy that I'm spending more time with that, we're going to get the iron out or the clothes hanger and heat it up and do the branding soon. Right. So it's not like that. It's not like that. And there is a power greater than ourselves. Anyway, anything you want to tee up from that spiel?
Well, the first thing is I blew my own point. I didn't make the connection between the inability to tie shoes of my son's shoes and also having the ridiculous thought that, like, why doesn't he have Velcro shoes, right? And that it's somebody else's fault. That was my first sponsor using that to say, like, you're telling me that your life is not unmanageable, like, like what? So like, it's not a big deal. Like, that's not normal. If you
Right.
want to go back to being normal, then it's not manageable, right? And then, like you said, yeah, I love that came to believe. There's no right path, and there's no right beliefs. There's just a group of people working together to recover and then to stay recovered. And so, what I would say is, honestly, there's no greater example of the higher power that starts to show up than what happened to me yesterday. Telling what I needed to tell my group, and the outpouring of support that came up afterwards, right? Like, that I was emotional the rest of the day. And thank God I have that in my life. And you know telling it to my wife, and she got emotional, right? And that's a higher power, right? That's something that I wouldn't have had if I didn't do this, and if I didn't keep doing this. And so I'm filled with gratitude that I have that kind of support whenever and wherever I need it.
Well, that feels like a nice bow on a very, very good conversation. I appreciate our connection over time. You're the sort of the gatekeeper to kind of open the door to me. And, all these years later, I tell you all the time, you get tired of it. I'm just so grateful that I ran into you, or that you had the audacity to describe the maintenance bottle next to me. That's the hook, line, and sinker me. Todd, I think you're wonderful. Thank you for sharing your humanity, and thanks for sharing your story with this audience. Any closing thoughts from you?
No, I would come right back at you, and I'm grateful that our paths crossed, and that you're part of my recovery. I'm super grateful for that. So thanks for having me again as a guest.
Yeah, right on. Thank you, my friend Todd. Thank you for the times of the past and this latest podcast and all the conversations to come. And thank you for sharing your humanity, your vulnerability with this audience of people that are listening to my podcast. If you or a loved one are in jeopardy of substance use disorder, or alcohol use disorder, or opioid use disorder, or addiction, or whatever words you want to use, there's lots of available resources out there. There's a website that I like to point at called shatterproof.org. And at the top, you can go to, I don't remember what the link is, but it says Addiction 101. And I'll put it in the show notes as well. It helps kind of explain what this condition is a bit, like Todd was saying in the conversation about whether you have it or you don't. And I think they do a fabulous job of kind of laying out the science of it and what it's all about. So hopefully that's helpful as well. Todd, thanks again, and thanks everybody for listening. Please feel free to share these podcasts with others if you think they might get some benefit. Till next time.